odd person out because I'm from Canada. So I do know Brooklyn. We used to visit as kids, and I've been to Brooklyn since, but that's about it. And I've never been to Georgia. Regardless, thank you for having me here. The topic, you might feel uncomfortable at times, I don't know, but I'm going to be pretty candid. And I also, if you have any questions, this is probably the safest place you might be able to ask it of me. So go for it. Essentially, I'm going to talk about what it's like to walk within our Jewish community with this particular skin on. And I think it's timely, this conversation, because as you know, stuff is blowing up everywhere. In the United States and to a certain degree in Canada, people are reflecting on society in general and how it's been operating for hundreds of years. And in particular, and I can only speak for Canada, within the Jewish community, there's a lot of soul searching as to how do we treat people that we sometimes, and dare I may even say often, treat as other, which is problematic considering that as Jewish people, we're often othered. And so it's kind of distressing when we other others within our own community. And I like to say it's a minority within our minority, the community of Jews of color. So I'll first define Jews of color. Jews of color, it's a term that's fairly newish. It's hard to define ourselves per se. So for today, that is the term that we use, is Jews of color. And if you're in Canada, yes, I spell that with a U. So Jews of color is really a pan-ethnic term that's used to identify Jews whose origins come from either Africa, Asian, Latin American countries. So to put a spin on it, Jews who are not traditionally defined as coming from Eastern Europe. And I like to jokingly say Jews that may or may not look like Barbara Streisand or Woody Allen or Jerry Seinfeld, even though Jerry Seinfeld is Syrian. So others might self-identify as Jews of color. So if you're Sephardi, you might say you're a Jew of color. If you're Mizrahim or Yemenite, you might also identify as a Jew of color. That's really down to you. So when I say, it can be challenging at times. And I like to say it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the good is that I am a part of what I like to call the mishpacha, a beautiful family. That's the good. And we are community people, and we look out for each other. And so that's the good. The bad and the ugly, though, sometimes leave little marks. So I call those things, well, I don't call it. There's a term for it called microaggressions. And it's those microaggressions that feel like little pinpricks or little scratches, or if you've been bombarded by mosquito bites, you hear it around and they keep stinging you and they last. And for some of us, those microaggressions, those tiny little scratches that happen all the time, lead us to say, I'm tired of being scratched up because they're not being healed. So they leave the community. They say, forget about it. And for a community, we always like to say, there's not a lot of us. There's not a lot of us. But some of the reason that there's not a lot of us is that some of us have kind of said, I'm good. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And, the numbers of Jews of color, it depends on what survey you look at. And also there's some controversy around the numbers. In the States, it runs around 11%. If you use the broader definition, it could be as high as 20% of the Jewish population are Jews of color. And surveys are problematic. We did one here, Jews in Canada survey. And when I got the copy of it, I immediately went to methodology. And I said, the methodology in and of itself is problematic. And they were like, well, how could it be problematic? I said, you're missing a whole segment of the population. You're potentially missing Jews who convert. You're potentially missing Jews who are non-Ashkenazi. And you're potentially missing Jews of color because your primary methodology was last name. And you are also missing Jews who may have married somebody who is not Jewish and has a non-Jewish last name. So it's problematic. So the numbers aren't there. So there aren't any numbers for JOCs, because I said I wouldn't have gotten a call, you know, with a last name like Campbell, even though when people say, oh, that's not a Jewish last name, I said, well, it's my last name. So therefore that makes it a Jewish last name. I carry it, right? And there are Scottish Campbells, or there's Scottish Jewish Campbells. I am sure there's a Jewish Tartan. So there probably are, right? Anyway, so surveys E. But having said that, it doesn't matter how many of us there are. If I walk into a synagogue, and this is what's happened to me, I get a gamut of questions. So I used to synagogue hop. And I'll tell you, if I went to a synagogue and I wasn't greeted, and I'll tell you what that, I'll define that a little better, but if I wasn't greeted and made to feel welcome, I wouldn't come back to that synagogue again. And my bar for that is not very high. It is, if I walk in and you say, hi, welcome, Shabbat Shalom, odds are I'll probably come back. And you think that's a really easy thing? You think, oh, most people do that? I can tell you, most do not. And I've synagogue hopped. And what I get instead is either silence, a look, and a look away. So you can appreciate, though, that I'm a new face. You shouldn't be looking and looking away. If anything, even for security reasons, you shouldn't just look and look away. I have heard, hi, I'm so-and-so. Are you Jewish? At a synagogue, you know, and I almost always want to answer, I think so, because that's why I'm here. And really, and I've had colleagues and friends who it's even gone deeper than that, where they've come in what I call the outwardly Jewish look, because JOCs tend to make sure they look as Jewish as possible. So that by that I mean Magin David, kippah, talit, whatever. So he came in and he had his talit, he had his kippah, and he had his prayer book, and he was still questioned. And it's like, he came in with all the signs. So why would you ask him if he's Jewish? I could, you know, even if he just came with a kippah. But he had a kippah, talit, and prayer book. What more did you want him to have? What more do you need? And so I challenge you to think about that, because as bizarre as it sounds, it happens quite frequently. You know, I get you don't look Jewish. And I say, well, what does Jewish look like? And inevitably, they describe what an Eastern European Jew would look like. And I said, well, you know, the Jew from Yemenite will not look like an Eastern European Jew. A Jew from India will not look like that. A Jew from China, a Singaporean Jew, you name it. They would not look like that. So please define, what does a Jew look like? And part of it is because we have created this narrative of not only who is a Jew is a huge question in and of itself, and we argue about that all the time as Jewish people, right? But what does a Jew look like is another twist off of that. So what does a Jew look like? A Jew looks like me. And I'll give you an example of how we are taught this. I have a good friend, she's Italian Catholic, and her husband is Russian Jewish. And I was in Israel for about a year, and I came back, and I was planning on going back to Israel, but I didn't. Clearly, I'm still here. And what I had done was I had given everything away. And like, I gave up my place, I sold my Jeep, I did all that stuff. So Rosa said, stay with us for a while. What started as for a while turned into like 3 years, something like that. It was ridiculous length of time. But anyways, her little girl, Isabella, I have known her all her life. She's 7 now. And she, because her father is Jewish, but he's Jewish, so by his own definition, he's Jewish. He said to me, he says, well, Rivka, you're going to show Izzy all about Jewish stuff. So Izzy and I would play the synagogue game. She knew about I used to wear a Star of David. I wear something different now, still Jewish. And she would say, oh, your Jewish star, your Jewish star. We lit Hanukkah candles together, the gamut, right? As you can appreciate. And I always threatened I was going to sneak her away when and have her converted in bat mitzvah, but that's a whole other story. But anyways, so one day Izzy was sitting on my lap, and she's like, you know, she says, I like your Star of David. You wear it because you're Jewish, right? And I said, yes, I do. And yes, yes. And I said, but your daddy's Jewish. No, he's not. Yes, he is. No, he's not. I'm like, yes, he is. Your grandparents are Jewish too, your dad's parents. And Max overheard all of this and lost his mind. He's like, Isabella, I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish. And it went back and forth. And all of a sudden there was like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, oh no. I said, she thinks Jews look like me, Max, because the Jew that she knows in her life that talks about Judaism, that, you know, looks like me. You don't look like me. So in her little 3-year-old mind, you can't be Jewish. I'm Jewish. So what does Jewish look like? You ask Isabella. Well, she knows now that we look different ways, but she would have said Jews look like her and would have pointed to me. And we hear those stories. We hear the Ethiopians who were shocked when they went to Israel and saw all these white Jews, because they were like, you know, so imagine if they went up to you. If somebody who looked like me, went up to you and said, are you Jewish? Well, you don't look Jewish. I can just picture how that would make you feel, because you'd be like, but of course I'm Jewish. And people take it a step further. I have been quizzed on my knowledge of Judaism and Torah. And it's like, are you kidding me right now? You're testing me? When we know that there are Jews that are completely, like, I go back to Max. Max is Russian Jewish. Test him on Torah and he'd just look at you and say, but you probably wouldn't test Max if you saw him, because he fits your definition. But I get questioned on that, and I call people out on it, quite frankly, because it's crazy inappropriate, you know. But I've had some stories that have made me laugh, and I've had some stories that have just made me want to just like snap. There was do you know Tovli? Do you have Tovli in the US? It's a pizza place. It's a kosher pizza place, quite popular here. And I do call them out on it. They're doing much better now. My kids used to go there all the time, and my kids are biracial. So they almost had a pass, because they would just assume, oh, they probably have a white Jewish parent. And plus my son is what we call kind of white passing. So they'd go there and get their pizza all the time. And one time I decided I was going to go and get my slice of pizza. And I walked over and I pop in and I ordered, you know, may I have a slice of cheese pizza? And the person looked at me and said, well, you know, this place is kosher, right? And I said, I should hope so, because that's why I'm here. And I said, and I hope you're asking that of everybody else in this line. And I even wanted to take a step further and say, does it matter to you whether I know if it's kosher or not? Because I'm still going to pay for it and eat it. So what does it matter to you? But I was already just like, it just flipped me in a different spot. So those are the things that have happened to me. But I'll tell you my favorite story, which is actually a fun story. So I used to work as an emerge nurse, and I was the charge nurse this particular time, and it's a very busy hospital, and it has a high Jewish patient population. And in that hospital, I'm very used to, when I was working, I was very used to people saying, so you're Jewish, how are you Jewish? Da, 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 da. It was almost by shift sort of thing. Anyways, and you just let it roll for the most part. But this one time, we had a trauma patient coming in, so it was very hectic. And so I ran into the resuscitation room because I needed to move somebody out who was stable. So I ran up to the stable patient, took all the monitors off of her, put it on the stretcher, ran down the hallway at breakneck speed, kind of like what you'd see on those TV shows. So breakneck speed, threw her stretcher into a room, hooked her back up, barely said a word to her. Just, I think all I said was, hey, I'm moving you to another room. And I started to run out. And she said, just a minute, please. So I turned around, and in typical emerge nurse fashion, I was like, took a deep breath and said, yes, you know, because my head's already like somewhere else. And she says, I know you're busy and I know what's going on. She said, but I just have one thing to say to you. And I said, sure, go ahead. She said, so when you ran into the room, you grabbed my monitor and you explained sort of what was going on. She said, and I noticed you had a Star of David hanging from your neck. And she said, and I thought to myself, oh, is she Jewish? And then she says, as you're running down the hall, you bumped the stretcher off the wall. And when you bumped the stretcher off the wall, you said, oi. So then I knew. And that's all. Just that one little phrase, oi. She's like, and then I knew you were. And that was it. So that was a really cool experience. And that's kind of the way you do it. That's kind of the way you do it. Because I can go on forever about microaggressions. Who gives a poop at this point? What I would like you to take from this is how to be welcoming to people who might not necessarily fit what you think of as Jewish. Because there's a whole lot of us out there. And some of us were born into this, Some of us, who I like to teasingly say, oh, you converted? Are you sure about that? But I say that teasingly. So some of us have converted into it. Some of us have come in some way, shape, or form. And the first thing you should do is when you ask that question, what you're doing is you're implying there's a certain stream for Jews of color to have entered Judaism. And in your mind, whether you realize it or not, you're kind of saying, oh, you must have converted. That's your stream into being a Jew. Or you must have been adopted. Or you're from an interracial family, or something like that. And yes, those may have been the ways, but it's not down to you to figure out how that person got there. Just like I wouldn't say to you, so you're Jewish, how did you become Jewish? I just know you're Jewish, and that's it. How you got here, it's not germane. It's actually not germane. So be mindful of that. And I know that we love Jewish geography. I love Jewish geography. I am like, my son calls me Super Jew. My daughter calls me Jewy Jew. These are my Jewish children, okay? Because I just love Jewish geography. I like saying, oh, this person, look at this person. Did you know? I found out, for example, the other day, John Forsythe, Charlie's Angels, and Dynasty. I didn't know he was Jewish. He was Jewish, by the way. So that was my tip for last week. I was like, dang, so I love Jewish geography. But how do you do that? I would say get to know the person first. Start with a Shabbat Shalom. Start with a welcome. Start with a, hey, would you like this? Start with that. And also share your story. Share your story. I was at a wedding in Montreal, and it was my equal other, Yoram's family, and it was a Chabad wedding, and I had a blast hanging out with all the women, dancing on all this, and having a great time. And full knowing, too, I was the only Jew that looked like this in the circle, whatever. Anyways, I go outside, and this gentleman strikes up a conversation. So I'm already braced for the question. He starts off by telling me his life story, and I'm not even kidding. He was telling me how he was born in Montreal and this and that, and then he says, he tells me this story. And then he says, and what about you? And I said, oh, I was born in Canada. My parents are from Jamaica, and da-da-da. And then he says, Jamaica. He goes, I used to go there a lot. He said, there's a huge Jewish population in Jamaica. And that led me to say, well, yes, I know, because my mother is Jewish from Jamaica. And that's the way you do it. So I found out a bit about him. He found out, because maybe in his mind, he was wondering, is this young lady, is this lady Jewish? And he found out by opening up his story, and then I slid into it beautifully because he made me comfortable enough to give a little bit about my story. So that's one way to do it. And I also would say that if somebody is in a Jewish space, because we know not often do non-Jews wander into our space unless they have a reason, unless they're converting or whatever. But they don't tend to go to Rosh Hashanah. They don't tend to just like go into, do you follow what I'm saying? So odds are, if I'm at your high holiday services, I probably intended to be there. And I'm there most likely because I am Jewish. And if I'm not, it's possible that I'm going through conversion and I'm mandated to go to Jewish life cycle things. Who knows? Whatever. But that should be your first go-to, is I'm there because I know I know who I am and I know where I am. And there's no harm in that. And it also goes bigger too. We talk about, because I'm not just talking about Jews that look like me, I'm also talking about Jews whose minhag may not be the primary minhag of our society. And the primary one is Ashkenazi. And so we have to be mindful. Not everybody is also Ashkenazi. You know, my background is actually Sephardi. And I know that when I go to synagogues, often I don't see anything that I can relate to. So the tunes are Ashkenazi. The language is very much Ashkenazi. Like, people will say Good Shabbos. They won't say Shabbat Shalom or anything else, right? And so we have to be mindful of that too, that not everybody fits that minhag. I had a gentleman say to me one time when I was teaching a computer class, and he says, "So you're Jewish, Rivka?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "So that means you speak the Jewish language?" And I said, "What might that be?" I knew where he was going, but I said, "What might that be?" He says, "Well, Yiddish, of course." I said, "Well, no." I said, "I would argue that Yiddish is a language that is spoken by Jews." I said, I would also say in particular Jews from Eastern Europe. I said, but we also have Ladino, and that's, you know, Jews. I said, so there are different languages. But I said, if you want to say the Jewish language, so I could probably put up a good argument that it's Hebrew. And so I said to him, I said, "Do you speak Hebrew?" And he's like, "No, I don't." I said, "So then are you Jewish?" You know, we have to be mindful of things like that, that we do tend to sway that way. And that, you know, the conversation about Sephardi Jews shouldn't just come up at Pesach when you're really envious of us because we can have rice and beans. Okay, so it's broader than that. We're an incredibly diverse people. Like, if you just even, I can give a reading list to Orly if you wish, of how diverse we are. We are a scattered people, right? We talk about that. We're scattered people. So how is it that we don't process that we were scattered everywhere, that there are South American Jews, that didn't necessarily bounce from Eastern Europe. There are Caribbean Jews, which for 200 years of our New World history, that was the center of Jewish life, was in the Caribbean, not in North America, in the Caribbean. Why are we puzzled when we hear about Ibu Jews? Or some people say Igbo, but Ibu Jews. Why are we puzzled? Why are we surprised about Indian Jews? Why were we surprised about Ethiopian Jews? When I can probably argue that Ethiopia was mentioned in the Bible, India is mentioned in the Torah, but I've never seen Poland or Russia mentioned in the Torah. So why are we surprised when these, what we like to call emerging communities, I argue they're not emerging, they're just emerging to you. They've always been there. And so we should never be surprised. And we should embrace that their story is our story. My Jamaican Jewish story is our story as a Jewish people. And we need to do better. If we counted all of us in all these different countries, we are probably then that 0.2% or whatever that number is of the worldwide population. And so I challenge you, be welcoming, be curious, but educate yourself first before you're curious, because they're also not, we are not also there, generally speaking, to educate you about us when we're trying to partake in Shavuot, when we're trying to partake in Rosh Hashanah, when we're trying to partake in Friday night services or Shabbat morning services. So be mindful of that. And because we're here to stay, we love our community, and we just want to feel like a member of the family. And that's it. Zeo. I felt like I spoke really quickly, and I'm sorry for that. But please, any questions, boom, boom, boom at me. I see iPhone has a question.
Alan, go ahead, just unmute yourself.
Can you unmute him, Orly? Do you have that power?
I can ask him to unmute, but...
Oh, there we be.
There we go.
Hello? Can
Hello,
you hear
Alan.
me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can.
Hi. first of all, in today's society, whenever a stranger comes into a synagogue, they are always questioned whether they're white or black or Ethiopia, whatever color, or we just want to make sure that they're there for a religious purpose. So I know that that's one thing that happens all the time. I was in Lisbon for Rosh Hashanah, and they questioned me. I said, I'm past president of the Federation. And they said, I'm sorry, we'd like to see your ID. They asked me all kinds of questions.
Yes.
One other comment, we do a lot of cruising before the pandemic, and every Friday night we go to the services they have on the ship because we find out who's Jewish. And we all ask each other, well, where they're from, and everybody looks different. They're not all white. They're not all black. They're all different people, and some from India, and you just know that we're all over the place.
Absolutely.
When I was in Israel, I saw more black Jews than I saw white Jews in some areas.
Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah.
If we profess to be Jewish, God help us.
There you go. So I'm going to address your first thing. Yes, we obviously understand security, but JOCs, in particular in the United States, are very hesitant when it comes to security, because all of us know somebody, even by beyond arm's length, who has. There's one sad story about a black male who came in with his outfit, and the police were called on him. And so we all have those stories, and we like to think we know about security, like we want to be as comfortable, but Jews of color are disproportionately questioned more than others, and are a little more nervous. Like when the talk was up in Canada, because we don't have armed guards, we just have police officers sometimes on high holidays. And one of the concerns in our community was that, how are they going to know? Because they also need some education on who is a Jew or who is Jewish, or what I'm saying? Because they're often the first line of who they let in or not, who takes that further step, right? So, because I remember a young lady once asked me at high holidays, this young girl, she was pre-bat mitzvah, she was quite young. And she said to me, she says, Rivka, she says, why are police here? And I explained why. And then she said, but how would they know? She said, because Jews look like you, they look like me, they look like, and I said, it is a tricky question. It is a tricky question. And I said, there are certain other things that would lead you to where they belong. They may have a machzor with them. They may be wearing a kippah. They may be, there's other things that you have to kind of look at. But it is tricky, and I do understand it's tricky. And yes, Alan, everybody should be asked, and in the same manner. Not, are you Jewish, to a couple. It should be, they should be a standard set of questions, and everybody should be asked, no doubt. And in terms of your cruise, that is freaking fantastic. And the thing is too, is look at the question that you said to me. You said was asked, where are you from? That's a lot different than, so are you Jewish? And that is a better question. Where are you from? You're on a cruise, everybody's from somewhere, right? So it makes sense. And that really is a better question to ask, 100%. And I hope you had a great time, and that's a wonderful moment. I've only experienced that once, and that was in Israel, like you said. I was having a Friday night dinner with a friend of mine, and we invited a bunch of people over. And all of a sudden, I had this moment, and I looked around, and I was like, will you look at us? We have a Jew from India, my friend Ronan. We have a Jew from Spain. We have a Jew from Peru. We have a Jew who's a Sabra, but his background is Russian. And we have me. I said, this is Judaism. This is Judaism. This is a family, And that is what I would love to see in our community, because I know we are all in our community. And that is what I would love to see. And Rita.
You're still muted. Hold on.
Now,
Yeah.
can you hear me? I have something similar like you. I was born in Chile, so I'm Latino, right? So the Latinos cannot perceive that I'm Jewish. First of all, they tell me I don't look like them. Second, when they find out I'm Jewish, they still ask me if I go to church. And I say, no, I go to a synagogue. So they say, oh, you converted. I said, no. You married to a Jew. I said, I'm married to a Jew, but I was born a Jew. That can't be. And I finally just give up.
Yeah.
The same thing, I have a chai. I don't know if you can see it.
No, I cannot.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Yes,
chai,
yes.
it's a modern chai. You know what they asked me? If that's a cat.
Same first initial, but.
Okay. All right. But that's my experiences.
Yes, and
So,
that's frustrating. I can understand when you said that you give up, and it's very prying. It's very personal, right?
yeah, and it's very shocking for them to find out that I don't go to church
Yeah, yeah,
and that I do not follow Christ.
yeah.
So they cannot think about it.
I know. I get sometimes I get similar in the non-Jewish Black community, not in the Jamaican community, not in the non-Jewish Jamaican community, because there's enough history about Jamaican Jews on the island. There's enough of a presence about the Jewish history and presence on the island that people don't bat an eye. And there are a lot of Jamaicans running around with Jamaican Jewish last names like Da Costa, Lindo, Silvera, and all, there's enough of them. There's an actor, Delroy Lindo. I'm convinced. I'd like to get in touch with him and say, so it's possible you have Jewish ancestry because you have a typical Jamaican Jewish last name, Lindo. Anyways, but every now and then I get the odd person who they find out and they're just like, oh, and they kind of just look at me and then they say stuff like, so you don't accept Jesus? Who? No. Or they try and get me to come to Jesus. I've had that too, because they can't process this Black girl who is not Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever it may be. It's like, no. And then they're like, but they get a little confused, but then they move on. So.
I have a question sorry, Toby.
Oh, go ahead, Carol. Go ahead.
All right. So a couple of years ago, I was privileged to host a program with an Ethiopian gentleman who left Israel with his wife and moved to the United States. And he was dark complected. His wife was was white. And he talked about his experiences with prejudice and said that depending on where you are in the world, the prejudice is different. In Israel, the prejudice was that he spoke Amharic and that he was Sephardic. And the prejudice in the United States was more, he said, because he was Jewish, not because he was Black. But in light of the things that are going on these days and the strain between the Black community and the Jewish community, which I always thought, since the civil rights movement anyway, had a lot of close ties. Do you find that sometimes you are caught in the middle of some of the hate speech more because of color or because of religion? And does it really matter? Do you have to deal with bigots differently than you deal with, other anti-Semites? Is that an odd question?
No, it is not an odd question at all. It's not an odd question at all, Carol. It's hard. It's actually hard when you have this kind of dual identity, especially in times like these. So yeah, you know, even not in times like these, I get it with both barrels. I get it with both barrels. I get the anti-Black racism, and I get the anti-Semitism, especially when they find out I'm Jewish, because I don't exactly hide it. And I also hear the undercover anti-Semitism of people who don't, non-Jews who don't perceive me as Jewish, and they say, can I say the S word? They say shit. So, sorry, I said it. So, because that's what it is. And so, and then I bust them out, and they almost like faint. But I get a bit of anti-Semitism. I don't know if, sometimes I think things have been blown out of proportion. There is Black anti-Semitism, but it is not in the numbers that people think it is. Like, people talk about Farrakhan, and I jokingly say, well, the only people talking about Farrakhan are white people. Black people aren't really talking about Farrakhan. Like, it's you all keep putting them in our mouth, right? And, you know, Black people, I'm gonna be blunt. Black people are too busy worrying about surviving to worry about any other things, right? And putting roofs over their heads and just like literally surviving. So I don't get a lot of Black anti-Semitism. I get white anti-Semitism for sure, or non-Black anti-Semitism. I get racism from within our Jewish community. So with all of this stuff that's going on, racist Jews, white appearing Jews are rising to the surface. And I'm hearing a lot of crap directed at Black people, where I actually had to leave some settings because it's like, do you realize you're also, when you're Black people, first of all, not a monolithic group, but when you're slamming Black people, you're also slamming this Black Jew. You're also slamming people within your own family. And so that's been rising to the surface. So it's been very challenging. And things like Black Lives Matter, and by that I mean the organization, not the statement, is causing Black Jews a lot of grief. And I've had to say to people, and they're like, well, Black Lives Matter has these anti-Semitic slant. And first I say, well, actually, what started it was the movement for Black lives, which is separate from Black Lives Matter, but nonetheless. So they're like, well, we can't support it. And I keep saying to them, I said, you actually don't have to support the organization Black Lives Matter. You actually don't have to, but you have to support anti-racism initiatives. And you have to learn to distinguish between the statement Black Lives Matter and the movement Black Lives Matter. It's two different things. One's a statement, one's an organization. But I find that a lot of people are using that to not support anti-racism efforts. They're so focused, our Jewish community as a whole is so focused on this that they're just detracting from the actual issue. And, you know, and also when you mentioned civil rights, at some point, yes, there were some Jews who supported the efforts of civil rights. Not all Jews. Not all Jews. So we as Jewish people have to stop hanging on to that, because it wasn't all Jews. It was a few very brave Jews who did it, who also got flack within their community for doing that. And I also remind you, it was 55 years ago. 55 years ago. You don't get a pass for some, it's not in perpetuity. The marching with Martin Luther King Jr. It is not something that lasts in perpetuity. What are you doing today? Because between 55 years ago, which is my entire lifetime, and now, things have not gotten better. Whether outside of the Jewish community or within the Jewish community, they have not gotten better. So I challenge those of us who can to stand up and be like those few 55 years ago in 1965, and be that person today. And it's a very, being an ally also means taking yourself out of it. It's not oppression Olympics, you know, it's not Black Lives Matter. Yeah, but Jewish lives matter. But it's not that statement in and of itself. There's no only in front of it. And we know the bigger, broader picture is actually white supremacy. And white supremacy affects Jews that look like you, affects Jews that look like me, affects anybody who does not fit their rigid definition of who is white. So together, we should be fighting against the white supremacy, which dictates what is happening in the United States. And that's what we should be fighting for as a group of people. And I'm getting off my soapbox now. Is Ken Miller going to say something?
Yes, I belong to the Orthodox Shul here, BBJ, and we have a number of families that happen to be Black. We've moved here about 2 years ago, as of the 1st, it was 2 years ago. I've never seen any, prejudice from anybody in the shul with the Black people that are members, that have been members for a very long time. And I think the one family has been Jewish for close to 20 years now. Also, we have had a regular attendee who's one of the Igbo Jews from Nigeria, and Ethiopian Jew is, she's married to one of the Sephardic, and they are members of the shul. So I've never seen any of the prejudice against any other Jew at the BBJ. I don't know, you'd have to talk about, at your shul, Orly, whether, I don't know what exists there. But one thing I'd like to mention also is that I was the chair of, in Tucson, Arizona, where we lived before we moved here, of the partnership between Tucson and the region in Israel, which included Kiryat Malachi, which is the city where they have
Ethiopians.
The largest population of Ethiopians, and we would do social projects for them. And even though there is prejudice against the Black Jews, Ethiopians in Israel, there are things that are being done by the government there that unintentionally, are very bad for the absorption of the Ethiopians into the population. In Kiryat Malachi, there were schools that were totally Ethiopian, segregating, not using the word segregation, but segregating.
It was segregation.
It was separate, but equal, which is what it was down in the South, for all those years that the civil rights, broke up, here in the South. But that's still an ongoing problem there. And when I brought this up at our meeting with our Israeli counterparts about this, and it was after I had spoken with one of the Ethiopian girls who was on the board of the Ethiopian counterparts, and when I brought up the issue, she was like exploding, getting it out of her system, because she would keep quiet about how Ethiopian kids are not being treated in an equal manner, and which enables them to be absorbed. So there's a lot of issues that are, under the surface, not necessarily done intentionally to, the Black Jews, in this case, the Bnei Israel, the Ethiopians. In fact, there was one thing that I had learned there as the chair, in that for many years, all the Ethiopian Jews were referred to as Falashim.
Which is a slur.
It means outsider, stranger.
It's a slur. Yeah, it's a slur.
It is a slur, and it was not used as a slur by people like me and other people in the United States because we did not know. Then I was corrected because I did not know what the actual meaning of the word Falashim was. But there are still a lot of issues within Israel, and Kiryat Malachi, besides being the largest city for population of the Ethiopian Jews, was also pretty much a border community that was the dumping ground for a lot of the Jews coming in from Asia, like the Bakharan Jews and others, and that when they were coming in, they were viewed as being less than by the Ashkenazi or by the Iraqi, who were more educated than the ones that the Bakharan was actually, northern mountainous region of Iraq and Iran. Yes, this has been a problem within the Jews for quite a while. The Ashkenazi looking down the Sephardim looking down this group and that group. And it takes many years for it to work itself out. And then another group comes in and we start all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the ones in your synagogue, when you say that you don't know or you haven't seen it, doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Sometimes it's very subtle, and the only way you're going to know is if you ask them. And I'm not even sure if you'd want to even ask them, but that's the only way you would know. I'll give you an example. I remember sitting at Kiddush one time, and this woman turned to me and said, "Oh," she said, her language, we were talking about food, and her language was, "Oh, your people love fried foods, don't they?" And I was like, "Well, what are my people?" I said, "Because my one part of me is Jamaican, and that's a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and so on." I said, "And Jewish." I said, "You might be referring," I said, "I think people in the South like a lot of like fried cooking," but I said, "I think that's everybody." I said, "So I don't know what you mean by your people." So there's those subtle little things that you brush off, but you kind of go, "Here we go, your people." And so you don't know 100%, but I give your synagogue credit because they clearly, regardless of whether or not they experienced it, they clearly feel welcome because they're still there. Because they're still there. Because that's your biggest indication would be if they weren't there. And in terms of Israel, yeah, Israel has this horrible habit. Other countries do to a certain degree, but I hold Israel to the higher standards. Every country has this ability to make the last ones in kind of treat them like crap, right? I expect Israel to do better, but you're right. We forget the history of Israel. And there's a wonderful book called The Sephardi Journey, which you should read if you have a chance, because it gives a great history of Jews in the Middle East, including Israel. Sephardi Jews never left the land of Israel, and I always struggle when they say that Israel, when they say the establishment of the state of Israel, I actually can't stand that statement. I prefer the reestablishment of the state of Israel. That's my personal preference. But there was always Jews holding down Israel. And for the most part, they were Middle Eastern Jews. And, speaking Hebrew as their daily language. At one point, there was one guy left in Jerusalem who held it down, wouldn't leave because Jerusalem, Jewish. And, it wasn't until people started coming that it shifted. It shifted from primarily Mizrahim and Sephardim to Ashkenazi. We see the shift in the stats, right? And then you're right. So then the next group, the next ones to make Aliyah, they're treated crappy. So whether it's Yemenites or the N-words, and then the N-word of Israel, right? And then you have the next group that comes in, and then the next group. It's like, Moroccans, and then Ethiopians. It seems like this continuously happens. Aliyah from China, Aliyah from India. And we have to do better. So when a Jew comes in, no matter how they come in, whether it's by, they bought a first class ticket, or whether they came in on operation whatever, should still be an even playing field. Jews welcome, start like this. Benefits are the same. Jobs are the same. You have equal opportunity, because I'm not buying that. I am absolutely never going to buy that, well, they came in, but they're less educated, because the assumption was made before even figuring out if they were or were not. It's interesting. Ethiopian friends of mine will say, one lived in Israel for a bit, and she goes, I left. She said, because if you look at the Ethiopians who don't live in Israel, who left, same group, same cohort, moved to US, they're doing well. In Israel, doing crap. Same cohort. So you can't tell me, oh, the ones in Israel were the less intelligent and these. No, it's the way they landed. My Indian friend in Israel, he says, yeah, he goes, his parents fought to be in a particular camp because they knew that they would get better education than this camp. I'm still Indian people. And he says, you can see it. You can see the differences. And who did that? Israel did that. And so we need to stop. We need to have people land on the same field, not.
In a way, it's a very difficult thing because especially with the Ethiopians, when they arrived, it was the big effort for the kids to deal with them and the older as they were going to be going into the army. And the army, the army serves a great purpose in Israel. It integrates all the people that enter the military. It's the great immigration for new immigrants and a great absorptions for the new immigrants and equalize.
So what would be the difference between them and Russian Aliyah?
Well, let me finish what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are a lot of projects and an emphasis on helping the Ethiopian women, giving them training to start their own businesses and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. The group that has the biggest problem happens to be the men, the older men who
Mm-hmm.
back in Ethiopia were the tribal leaders, the group leaders, the important person being the father and everything else, and being pulled out of Ethiopia of their own accord.
Mm-hmm.
And coming to Israel, they don't fit. And their culture is very much wiped out by absorption into Israel. And I've seen a huge amount of, alcoholism and drug use, and they don't have jobs because they don't speak the language.
Right.
And the hardest group to absorb happens to be the men. And until they unfortunately die off, Israel has this, a major group from the group that has now entered Israel.
Absolutely.
Just don't fit and will actually never fit.
That was Israel's fault. Hands down. That was not the Ethiopian father's fault. That was Israel's fault. One of the things with dealing with different cultures that Israel did not do, and the same thing goes for even the situation in the US. It's almost like, the expression white savior mentality. That never works. What Israel should have done, and which I hope that they will do for future immigration there, is you don't put somebody in charge of it who is not from that cultural background. You just don't do that. Mm. And because, first of all, you don't know where they're coming from. And things like the patriarchal system, they would have understood it and would have been able to negotiate around it and figure out how to do it from the perspective of somebody who is of that cultural group. So that was one of the biggest mistakes. And it is going to take another generation to fix that. And even still, they're still dictating to a particular group of people how things should be. And the people themselves should be part of a huge part of the conversation. Right. It's getting better in that, there's Penina, who is going to be the minister of immigration now, Minister of Immigration in Israel. So hopefully with the next group that is planning on coming in, she will be able to put in better systems to help them absorb. But, because when we think about the Russian Aliyah, who was in charge of the Russian Aliyah? Probably other Russians, right? Right? But all the other, exactly. So I think that's a first step. And because people want to also own their own. They don't, when you own, that teach a man how to fish thing, I can't remember, as opposed to fishing for him. Right. When you own it, you will do better. You will do better. But it's tough. It's going to be tough.
There's still one major problem with Israel in conjunction with the, these ministries, is that as soon as that government loses power, You
Yeah.
bring in a whole new group that's
Yeah,
coming
you start again. Like that's like every country, right? Who are we kidding?
to a large extent.
Yeah. Toby.
I just wanted to thank you so much for the insights. I think that, like with most things, everything starts with us. And I think when we personally bring that awareness into our interactions with anybody, I belong to Congregation Mikveh Israel, as do a few others on this, who are here. And Mikveh Israel, as you may know, is the third oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. And it also is situated downtown Savannah. We get lots and lots of visitors all the time to our, well, now we're not having services, but people coming in. The other thing is, as a Reformed congregation, or maybe not because we're Reformed, but we happen to be a Reformed congregation who our rabbi officiates at many conversions. We have many, many people, and I, as a past president and also as somebody who goes up to anybody who walks in the door just because that's what I like to do, find many people who have come into a synagogue for the very first time of many different colors. And I think that I appreciate your awareness. Usually my greeting is Shabbat Shalom, welcome. Are you visiting? Because that's the first question. Are you a visitor or do you live here? If you live here, please let us welcome you. Are you on our mailing list? As I said to Kamiko, we want you to be part of our community. And Carol Greenberg and I sort of serve as ambassadors for the Jewish Federation, welcoming people who are planning to come and who to come in. But I think you've given me personally, some very good insights into how we ask questions, how we greet people, how we look at anybody who's different from us. And I thank you for that. I think this was very enlightening and important, because all we can do, I mean, certainly we can be global and we can be, work for the good through organizations, but ultimately we're responsible for how we personally treat the next person. Just like through COVID, we're only responsible for how well we care for other people by wearing our masks, by social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. I can look at other people and, say, why are they doing that? Well, let me just do what I need to do for me, and hopefully I'll help the next person stay safe, because I'll be their way. But I just thank you, because I think it gives me another awareness. I think certainly, I don't know, sometimes our instinct is anybody who's different from us, we question. I usually personally, and I know Carol's this way and others, just want to know about you. I'm just interested
in geography.
Exactly. She said Brooklyn. Oh, where in Brooklyn? Want to find that commonality. But again, thank you for the nuances. And as Ken pointed out, I think that our congregations here in Savannah are very open to the diverse cultures who come in and join us and worship with us. And however, how we ask about the personal journey without, hopefully without prejudice and without questioning, are you for real? Are you really a Jew? Yeah, everybody's a Jew who claims to be a Jew. We're part of that family, and how they got there is of interest, but shouldn't be of criticism.
Exactly. And it should be their story to tell, not yours to ask. And because the only time, in my opinion, and I'm not a rabbi, but the only time it should be something you must know is marriage. There's certain things. And depending on the type of synagogue, whether they get to go get called to Torah, then that's when it matters. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're sitting, for when they're sitting next to you. It doesn't matter at Kiddush. It doesn't matter in regular interactions. But I loved what you said, Toby, and I'm going to use that. What you said about it's like the personal thing, and you compared it to COVID. And I think that's actually a really timely comparison. Wear your mask. Make sure you're, and you're right. Once it will take care of itself. If each individual has that awareness, that in itself grows bigger and bigger. It's like from the inside out. And next thing you know, those individuals make up congregations. Those individuals make up JCCs. They make up all these things. So then it moves out. And then you can frame the way those institutions work as opposed to from the institution down.
Yeah. However, I wish
accountable.
Yeah, I hope that your message, and Orly, you can be a conduit too, is I would love to see your message and even this conversation and what you, not the conversation as much as what you personally shared initially, would have a way to getting to more people in our
there. I'm getting there personally. Like I am working on a program with Federation for Teachers, and the message is getting out there because I've been doing this for a long time and I'm tired, quite frankly. I'm not getting any younger. I told you I'm as old as the march with MLK was, how long ago that was. I'm not getting any younger.
You're a baby.
And, it's all relative. My daughter and my grandchildren can say otherwise. But having said that, my goal is that these conversations, they never happen again. Actually, that's my ultimate goal. And, you know, having done this for years, it always felt like it was falling on just hitting something and just falling, right? But, you know, because of the world's turmoil, when you try and find a little grain of hope, and I think the hope for me is the community that I love and that I'm part of and that I have no choice but to be in, right? It's now listening. People are hearing and people are understanding. So in that sense, out of all of this crap that's going on, that is that glimmer of hope. And I can say I'm really proud of my community for stepping up and saying, wow, we got to listen. We got to fix this. And it's like different fresh eyes. So I thank you for all of this because this is our community, and we call ourselves a light among nations. Well, part of being that is being that light and being those people, because people watch us. We know that people are always watching the Jews. And let me tell you, no matter how many tikkun olam, hesed, whatever you want to call it, activities you do, people look and say, yeah, but look at how they treat the Ethiopians in Israel. Look at how they treat the Jews of color in the United States and Canada. Look at how they treat their own. So also be mindful of that.
Can I ask where in Canada you live?
I'm from Toronto, but I'm currently up north, Tobermory, about 3.5 hours away from Toronto by the water. My friends are animals and birds. That's what COVID did to me.
For someone who's been locked at home with her 2 children for the last 3 months, I miss the birds and the animals. And
I bet. I said the one good thing about COVID is that it happened at a time that my children are on their own. They don't live with me. They're adults. My daughter, though, with her twin boys, she's not so happy.
Kamiko, I saw that you had your hand raised. I just wanted to give you a second to talk and then to get a chance to wrap it up. Rivka, we're so grateful for your time today and your story. So, but let's just have one more question or comment.
I'm just going to say really quickly, I heard that you were doing a documentary, so I'm really curious, the title, maybe Orly could put it in notes or whatever. I'm looking forward to that.
I can quickly say it. Go continue. Was there something else?
Oh, and I was going to say, just as an addendum, there's a wonderful, it's not related to Jewishness, it's related to being white. I'm half Jewish white, right? So white adjacent, whatever the term is, there's so many terms. I mean, I always have to talk about that, so I totally get being mixed and all of that. My mom is Guyanese. So, but there's a beautiful thing, and I'm sure maybe you guys have seen this. It's Robin DiAngelo's lecture on YouTube. She also wrote a book called White Fragility, but her lecture on
the book. Yeah.
It's just so illuminating, and this is a group of progressive, deep thinkers, and I appreciate you being here. And I just think that's a good addendum in terms of awareness. It just brought a lot of awareness to me, and it brings a lot of, it's just a beautiful thing. So I highly recommend that.
Good. It's on my book list, Orly, so I will send you my book list. It's on there. Okay. And in terms of my documentary, it is this work in progress that I actually visualize myself. This is how my mind works. I visualize myself at the Oscars. I will be 90 years old, but will have finished that documentary and will be accepting my award. So it feels like it's going to take that long. But anyways, it's right now, the working title is is what's your story, the film? And it's a celebration of Jewish diversity. So it's truly a celebration of who we are. I've done a lot of B-roll footage in Canada and in Israel, speaking to people who are Indian Jews, Yemenite Jews. Some of it's in Hebrew, some of it's in English, just piecing it together. And yeah, it's got to get out there because it's starting to make me crazy. But they'll first, hopefully, God willing, be released at Jewish film festivals, and then the Oscar, then, you know, the short list for the Oscar when I'm 90. Under full-length documentary.
Thank you so much, everybody, for returning people. It was nice to see your faces. For our first timers, thank you so much for joining us.
I have a question. Yeah, first time. Yeah, my question is, how does one reach you by email or whatever? I didn't get on at the very, very beginning, and I'm in Northern Virginia. I have no idea really where everybody is, but is there a mailing list, or is there something that we could go to and get some sort of connection?
Sure. So I'm going to put my email in the chat box. It's Orly Henkin at savj.org. We are based out of Savannah, Georgia. This is a program that is done through our Jewish Family Services at our Jewish Federation. In a pre and hopefully one day post-COVID world, the program is called Food for Thought, and it is like a lunch and learn every Thursday at 1 o'clock. People come in, they have lunch together, and then we have a variety of speakers. And we knew that when we went under the quarantine and the lockdown, we still wanted to be able to connect with people. And so we went virtual. And we know that that's difficult for some people. The interactions with the computer or just sitting in front of a screen doesn't feel personal, but we wanted to be able to put it out there. And we've had everything from doctors to comedians. We have singers, we have speakers on important topics. I sometimes like to push our crowd to things that they might not be thinking about, because it's important to open your eyes to all the things. So feel free, send me an email, I'll add you. I have a list of people that I email every Monday and say, don't forget on Thursday, here's who's speaking. So we'd love to have you join us. Sharon, I see you.
Let me just ask one thing. You recorded this. Can we get a copy, or would you send? I would love for some people, you know, to hear it.
Yeah, so it gets saved. So because it's the JEA or the Federation account, it doesn't get sent to my email address. So I just have to wait for the whole thing to upload. And then when it does, I'll have it sent to me, and then I'll be glad to share it.
Great. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Ollie, can we have your email address again?
Sure. It is ORLYHENKIN at savj.org. savj.org.
All right.
And Rivka, I just wanted to tell you two funny stories of something you said that sparked me. I used to live in LA, and I used to be a preschool director at it's a spiritual gathering. It's called ECAR. And at the time, ECAR's rabbi was female. ECAR's two other rabbis were female, and their director of education was female. And so we're in there, and my daughter was in school, and he comes in to do something like dadding, whatever. And one of the girls says, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" Because they heard he was still in school. And he said, "I'm going to be a rabbi." And she goes, "No, men can't be rabbis."
It's all about perspective.
A reference of a rabbi.
100%.
And also, my mother, I like to call her the Jewish Dolly Parton. Anybody ever saw her? That's what she looks like. She is as Ashkenazi as they come. And my father's one of 12 Sephardi Moroccan boys, or children. They're not all boys. And they've all married Sephardic women other than my mother. And so the first time my dad brought her, he says that his mother looked at him and said, "She can't be Jewish looking like that."
Looking like Dolly Parton. Yep. A friend of mine went through that too. They, up until like the day they got married, her in-laws could not believe she was, because she was blonde, blue-eyed, and she's like, she just gave up.
But people are like, "What does your mom look like?" I'm like, just imagine Dolly Parton, but in a
Dolly Parton
and Jewish.
Dolly Parton's kind of cool though.
Yeah.
But we know that the Ethiopians said that too. The Ethiopian Jews said that too
Yep.
when they met their first white Jews.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. It's all about perspective, which is why it's so important to show our diversity. Show our diversity. So
So thank you again, everybody.
thank you, guys. Sorry. Thank you so much.
Hope
One
you
day
all
I'll
have a
come
great
down south.
Thank you.
afternoon. And have a good day.
Rivka, I will ask for your email from Orly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All
Take care,
right.
everybody.
It was
Take care,
enlightening.
everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.